Hello there. You're watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages of the morning's newspapers as they arrive. It's time to see what's making headlines with the Daily Mirror's political editor, John Stevens, and the deputy comment editor of the Daily Telegraph, Annabel Denham. They'll be with us from now until just before midnight. So let's take a look at what is on some of those front pages. We'll start with the front page of the Metro. You're next. That's comments on the arrest of Peter Murrell, the husband of the former Scottish First Minister Nicola Sturgeon, as part of the investigation into the SNP's finances. The Scottish paper, The National, points out that Mr Murrell has been released as inquiries continue. The Daily Telegraph leads with suggestions that the arrest of Mr Murrell may have been delayed until a successor had been chosen for Nicola Sturgeon. Well, the Daily Mail asks whether this was, in fact, the real reason she resigned, although she has already firmly denied that. According to the Eye, there are safety concerns that have led to a pause in the building of new smart motorways in England. The Guardian carries an investigation into the finances of the royal family, claiming that the King and late Queen took more than £8 billion in profit derived from land owned by the family. A top advisor to President Zelensky has told the FT that Ukraine's government could be willing to discuss Russian-occupied Crimea if Ukrainian forces make it to the border of that region. And the Daily Star tells us that sea anemones are still capable of learning despite not having brains, which I guess is good to know. A reminder now that by scanning the QR code that you see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of the papers while you watch along with us. All right, well, as I said, we're joined tonight by John Stevens and Annabel Denham for a look at those front pages. John, Annabel, good to have you both with us. Let's crack straight on and we'll go north of the border for the front page of The National now, and they managed to get this front page done after it was announced that Peter Murrell had been released. And let's start with you, Annabel. Quite a day for the SNP.
Indeed, some quite extraordinary scenes there. And Peter Murrell on the cover of The National, not necessarily looking like somebody who's just spent the day being grilled by the police. As The National are leading with, he's been released without charge, pending further investigation into the SNP's finances. Of course, the police could hold him for 12 hours without charging him. It would be unlikely in any instance for the police to have a clear-cut case after that point. They've made clear that they are still investigating, but really just quite an extraordinary story and extraordinary scenes, not like any scenes I've seen before here in Britain. You know, then all sorts of questions that are going to be coming off the back of this. You know, was this a factor in Sturgeon's decision to stand down? Would the result of the leadership contest have been different had this happened a few weeks earlier? Let's not forget that Kate Forbes secured 48% of the vote. You know, this is a story that is going to be ongoing for some time, and I think going to present a lot of challenges when it comes to contempt of court, because while the media might be very careful in the choice of language and the way it covers this story, there's no guarantee that people on social media will be doing the same. And I can imagine that there will be some amateur sleuths out there trying to do some investigations of themselves. But no, it's really the end to what has been a pretty staggering day for the SNP and the country.
Absolutely right. Let's bring up the front page of the Scotsman, John, and just discuss. We saw some moving picture of it there, and on the front of the Scotsman, they've got that forensics tent set up outside the house, which just added to the sort of extraordinary scenes that we were witnessing outside the home shared by Nicola Sturgeon and Peter Murrell.
Yeah, I mean, really extraordinary scenes, that tent, that massive tent outside. They usually see at the sites of murder scenes rather than kind of complex financial investigation like this. And you're showing the footage there of the police coming in and out. There were footage of the police with spades in the garden, searching a shed in the garden, and then more police in Edinburgh, where the SNP headquarters is. And, you know, we were looking at the National front page there just now, and they were going in on how Peter Murrell was being released. I think that is the most positive spin you can possibly put on this story. obviously the big thing is that he was arrested in the first place, and who knows where the police investigation will go in the next few months. But this is absolutely massive for the SNP. We know that they've kind of been such a dominating force in Scottish politics, led by Peter Murrell. He's been the chief executive since 1999, big force in Scottish politics behind the scenes. And then obviously Nicola Sturgeon was the first minister for 9 years. They've done phenomenally well in elections, particularly since that 2014 Scottish independence referendum, which was obviously lost. But ever since then, they've done so well in elections. It's been so hard for the Labour Party and the Tories. They've been nowhere near them in the polls. All of the elections, they've completely trounced all of their rivals. And now things seem to be falling apart. There seems to be a real change going on. There seems to be a tectonic shift. And you look at those polls in the last couple of weeks since Nicola Sturgeon said that she was standing down, and they've already started to shift. And you can see why the Labour Party and Keir Starmer, who, if he is going to get into Downing Street, he really does need to improve his party's performance in Scotland and pick up some of those seats that it had lost north of the border. They're going to be really hoping that this isn't just a temporary blip for the SNP, that this is a game changer that really puts Labour back in play in Scotland.
Yeah, and Annabel, let's look at the front page of your paper, because this sort of speaks, I guess, to some of the concerns, some of the questions that now will be raised over the resignation of Nicola Sturgeon following what happened today. And just talk us through some of this reporting here.
Sure. So essentially, police chiefs in Scotland are now being asked, coming under some pressure to reveal if they faced pressure to delay the arrest of Nicola Sturgeon's husband, Peter Murrell, until after a replacement was found for the outgoing Scottish First Minister. I think there'll be all sorts of questions over whether it was a factor in Nicola Sturgeon's decision to stand down as First Minister. Was that decision prompted by prior knowledge of the investigation? As John says, this is, really adding to the turmoil that's being felt in the Scottish National Party. Let's not forget that a couple of months ago, Murrell and Sturgeon were a power couple, and the party had survived allegations and scandals in the past, but it had done so with strong leaders. And what has fundamentally changed now is that you have Humza Yousaf coming in after a pretty bruising leadership contest, with claims that perhaps he's not the efficient political operator that his predecessors have been, and that the SNP may struggle to ride this out. But of course, like I said on the cover of the Telegraph, really pressing on the fact that, and the fact that Murrell had to resign, of course, straight away. Midway during the leadership contest. By then, it was too late to change the vote, but had he been arrested then, perhaps that might have had some political ramifications. Certainly, the scenes today will do. And, I think it's fortunate in some ways that it's a while before there will be another election. I mean,
the suggestion always was, of course, during that leadership contest, that Humza Yousaf was sort of the establishment, the top of the SNP's chosen candidate. So those questions will of course, be asked. And John, Nicola Sturgeon said it at the time when she resigned. She said it when questioned later, that outside influences, the things that were going on around her had no influence over her resignation. She sort of run out of juice in the tank. Do you think that stands up now we've seen the way that this is playing out?
I think she's going to face big questions about that. We heard from her today, from her spokesman, saying that she had no knowledge of what was going to happen today in advance of it, and that she'd be willing to help with the investigation in any way she can. But I think there will be suspicions about what on earth has gone on here. Did she have an inkling of what was about to come when she did make that shock announcement that she was going to stand down? And as Annabel says, the timing is really interesting here, coming so soon after the handover of power from Nicola Sturgeon to Humza Yousaf. And you look at, if this had been a couple of weeks ago, if the arrest had happened just before, while that contest was still ongoing, it might have made quite a difference, because, as you say, Humza Yousaf positioned himself as kind of the heir to Nicola Sturgeon. He described himself as the continuity candidate. And in the end, that race was very tight. He just won it 52 48 against Kate Forbes. And you think it wouldn't have taken much to happen differently in that contest for it to be a different result. So I think, yeah, it's definitely a difficult day today for the SNP and for Humza Yousaf, as he said today. But I think part of him will be sighing relief that this has happened now, rather than when that leadership contest was ongoing.
Yeah, perhaps, but I guess now he's got to deal with the mess that will ensue and the mess that his party may well face. All right, guys, let's move on from that. Of course, Peter Murrell has been released without charge pending further investigations. Let's just bring up, before we go to break, the front of the Financial Times, if we can here, Annabel, and let's just talk through this reporting here as President Macron and Ursula von der Leyen go to China to speak with Xi Jinping. The FT reporting that a senior aide to Vladimir Zelensky suggests the country could be ready for talks.
Yes, that's absolutely right. So splashed across the cover of the FT, the headline that Ukraine is ready for Crimea talks with the Kremlin if its counteroffensive succeeds. I have my doubts over this. The Ukrainian scenario has, for quite some time now, been clear-cut. It plans to expel Russian troops from every inch of its territory. That included Crimea and the self-proclaimed Donbas republics that were annexed by Russia. Ukraine's President Zelensky has repeatedly made clear his ultimate goal of bringing all his country's land, including Crimea, under Kyiv's control. He sees this as integral. So you have to ask where this change of heart could have originated from and why they would go ahead with talks when the momentum certainly seems to be behind them. Kyiv has, hoped that its counteroffensive will make headway south and sever a land bridge between Russia and forces in Crimea. So, take this at face value, but I do have my doubts over that. It will certainly be greeted with some relief by the West, because in Crimea there is no obvious military solution, and there is a real concern that if Ukraine presses into the region, then that could back Putin into a corner that could lead to him going for the nuclear option. So we'll see how things unfold, particularly with this counteroffensive. Yeah,
absolutely. And John, and with Putin meeting with Lukashenko and also sort of stationing nuclear-ready aircraft in Belarus recently, that sort of fear that the Crimean Peninsula could be the trigger for Putin to use those tactical nukes is very real.
Yeah, and countries like Britain have been very keen when people like the Prime Minister have been asked what is the solution in Ukraine, what is the kind of position we're going to end up with. They very much have publicly said that is up to Ukraine. What Ukraine kind of wants to go for is what the West will back them on. But you look at this FT piece, it quotes some Western officials in there who do raise these concerns that if Kiev does try and push back to those original borders and take back Crimea, that could be something that escalates this war and does push Putin into using nuclear weapons.
Yeah, I appreciate the analysis, John, Annabel. More from you guys later. Do stay with us. All right, plenty more to come. We'll be discussing what's been described as an eye-watering amount of money that the royal family reportedly makes from land. Do stay with us for that after this short break. Hello and welcome back. You are watching the press preview. With us to discuss the morning's newspapers are John Stevens from the Daily Mirror and Annabel Denham from the Daily Telegraph. Let's get right back into it. John, Annabel, good to have you still with us. And we'll go to the front page of The Guardian if we can now, guys, and bring this up. Reveals, The Guardian tells us, royals took $1.2 billion in private income from estates. John, what do you make of this reporting?
Well, you can see why The Guardian are running this story. We're obviously now in the countdown until the coronation. It's a few weeks to go. And obviously, for a long time, the monarchy has been incredibly strong in the UK. When the Queen was on the throne, then there weren't that many people suggesting that they wanted a republic and to get rid of her. But obviously, there have been questions raised as we have the transition of power from the Queen to King Charles about should the royal family continue to exist in the same way that it has for decades. And I think that's why you're seeing this reporting now. But this issue isn't particularly new. They've obviously added all these things up and adjusted it for time, and found that over more than 70 years of the Queen being on the throne, that if you add up all these different years together, you get this big sum of 1.2 billion pounds of money that they've got from these the Duchy of Lancaster and the Duchy of Cornwall.
Yeah.
They possibly will lead to more questions about how exactly are those estates taxed. The royal family don't pay corporation tax or capital gains tax on the money they make from those estates. And there are questions about how exactly are those estates run. They're run like companies, but they're not companies. The money goes privately to the head of state, to the royal family, rather than to the public purse. So yeah, it's not a particularly new issue, but you can see why it's coming up now with the coronation only a few weeks away.
Yeah, you do have to delve quite deeply into the article to find out the time span over which they're coming up with this figure. I mean, but Annabel, the question that the paper raises is whether some of those profits should go to the public instead. I should say the royal family, in response to this, said that the figure was speculative.
Yes, I mean, my view is that, most of this is nominal wealth that can't really be touched by them and is tied up with the trappings of the monarchy. And, even if we were to take all of their entitlements away, who would really be any better off? A few billions do not amount to much when spread over a population of 67 million people. And that's even assuming you could liquidate royal assets such as palaces. So I think it's all very well doing these investigations and doing this reporting and bringing up what the Guardian concedes is a centuries-old debate ahead of the coronation. But in terms of the practicalities of what can be done from discovering the precise sums of money, I think the answer is very little.
I think you might be right. OK, let's before we go to break, because we have run short of time, unfortunately, let's look at the eye. And this is a story about smart motorways. I do love these things, just opening up the hard shoulder to make an extra lane. But apparently, because of the lack of safety of losing the hard shoulder, Annabel, no more smart motorways are going to be built.
No, and it'll be interesting to see how the public responds to this, because polling seems to suggest that the public loathe smart motorways, but equally the public are not big fans of traffic congestion, which the smart motorways are supposed to help alleviate by opening up the hard shoulder. Motorways in general are pretty safe. They account for far fewer casualties than you get on rural and urban roads, despite the high speeds on them. And smart motorways have fewer casualties than normal motorways, but I think more of those casualties are fatal. So I think really you could spin the data on smart motorways however you chose, but it seems like the government has come to a decision that they are causing more trouble than they are worth, and they are indeed costly. So Rishi Sunak is looking at scaling back the scheme.
Now, unfortunately, John, I can't get your comments on this because we have run short of time, but you like smart motorways, yes or no? That's not yes or no. Maybe. Depends if you're stuck in traffic on one. All right, John, Annabel, do appreciate your time this hour. More from you later on. All right, let's take a look what the weather's got in store.